Hey everybody, it's Tyler Esselman.
And Michael Osinski.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
This One Goes to 11. It is the podcast where we invite someone to share an album with us that they believe is perfect.
So perfect, in fact, Michael, that 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
It's the season finale!
Season finale vibes going on over here. And also, let's let them peek behind the curtain. We front loaded everything this season. We front loaded all of our recordings. So Michael and I haven't seen each other in like a month. I want to reach through the screen and caress your face. That's what I want to do more than almost anything right now.
I mean, someday that might be possible, Tyler. I can't predict the future, but I can plan for it. So
okay, I'm going to put it on my wish list.
Okay.
I'm going to say it in my prayers tonight.
Well, Tyler, I'm especially glad that we are ending the season with someone who, I mean, for regular listeners of the podcast, this is someone from a world that has been oft referenced on this podcast. And so now we have someone who's quite high up in that world.
Yeah.
Tyler, who are we talking to today?
We are talking to the one and only George Keating.
George Keating is a freelance actor, director, and educator with a fine arts degree in acting from the Theater School at DePaul University, formerly known as the Goodman School of Drama. He is the studio artistic director and an adjunct professor of performance at TTS. He is a longtime member of Actors Equity Association, the labor union representing actors and stage managers in the theater, and he proudly serves as elected governance for that organization. He is also the co-creator of Schoolhouse Rock Live, the stage show based on the music from the educational 1970s cartoons. And perhaps most importantly, each summer, he welcomes hundreds of students and faculty to Northwestern University's campus as the Theater Arts Division Director of the National High School Institute, commonly known as the Cherubs Program. Oh my gosh, George. Hi, how are you?
Hi. I like that the most important part is cherubs. That I like with quotations around it.
It had to be.
Yeah.
I love you, cherubs. You're the very best ever.
Cherubs is
the most important.
Cherubs is a very important part of Michael Osinski lore for our listeners. We have our Mike guests. We have the people who call him Mike from back in the day. We have the people who work with him at Cherubs. So there's, and the same with me. It's you see all the different ecosystems from our lives.
Are you not aware of the Mike situation, George?
I don't believe I am. But I'm married to a Michael who is known as a Mike, and so this Michael phenomenon is very interesting to me.
Well, and there was that one summer at Cherubs where there were so many Michaels that y'all just started referring to me as Osinski because it was just there were like 5 of us, weren't there, that one summer? I think
probably.
Yeah,
there could have been, and Osinski is also just such a great handle.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
You can be a last name guy. I can't be a last name guy. People can't say Esselman. It doesn't roll off the tongue like Osinski does, I think.
Which is so strange because like Osinski, any name ending in ski, I'm like, it shouldn't roll off the tongue.
I know, but it's just fun. It
goes
right over this, right up the slope, up the big jump. Lindsey Vonn, baby. Anyway, we've gone far afield at this point. We have music to talk about. George, we're really excited to have you on for our season finale, talking about an album that I can't say that it was on my wish list of albums to talk about, which makes me very excited to hear you make your case for it, honestly. Please, George, will you tell us, what album hath thou brought before the This One Goes to 11 tribunal today?
Peter, Paul, and Mary, live in Japan, 1967.
Peter, Paul, and Mary is a band I was not very familiar with before this bit of research that we did. Michael, did you have a relationship with this band before?
Not really, because I didn't grow up in a folk music house. Although I don't know, does Dan Fogelberg count as folk music? Does Crosby, Stills and Nash count as folk music?
Sort of.
Okay,
tangential, yeah.
Folk adjacent, I think.
But it's one of those bands that I think it exists in the consciousness, kind of as this folk era that we're going to talk about at length here over the course of this episode. When you do a little digging and when you realize the kind of involvement they had in that scene, you realize that we probably don't give them enough credit, but I digress. For those of you who, like me, may not have had a lot of context around who Peter, Paul, and Mary are, we have a very convenient feature for you to get up to speed. Michael, as much as you might hate to do it, do you want to tell people what that feature is?
It's called The Beginner's Guide to Peter, Paul, and Mary's Live in Japan, 1967. in 60 seconds.
Yeah, and I'm doing it. So we'll see how I do.
And you get to evaluate his case, George. So like Tyler's going to try and sum it all up in a minute, and you can, you're an instructor. You're familiar with evaluating or assessing. I learned recently that assessment and evaluation are different things. I'm not going to bore our listeners with it. Tyler, are you ready?
I'm ready. Pull no punches, George. I'm ready for you to absolutely roast me here. Okay.
Yeah, Daddy, go for it.
All right.
60 seconds on the clock. In 3, 2, 1, go.
How the folk can one talk about the mid-20th century American folk revival without mentioning old Peter, Paul, and Mary? Mary Travers, Noel, Paul Stuckey, and Peter Yarrow were synthesized into a three-pronged force of folk in 1961 by legendary music manager Albert Grossman. His big idea was to create a folk group that could achieve commercial success while also authentically carrying on the activist tradition of legit folk music. And he just might have been onto something. They made their New York debut at the storied Bitter End, and their eponymous debut album hit shelves in 1962, featuring original tunes, interpretations of traditional folk standards, and covers of songs by some of their contemporaries. It achieved enormous commercial and critical success and laid the blueprint for the PP&M sound that helped define the folk music of the era. Nowhere is that sound on better display than their superb live release, Peter, Paul, and Mary Live in Japan, 1967. The recording quality, superb. The full engagement with the audience, you bet. The elevation of Dylan tunes to heights you didn't think possible, yep, it's all there and more. A timely reminder that if you love folk music done well, then don't you dare forget about Peter, Paul, and Mary.
All right. All right.
I actually felt pretty good about that one. Okay.
Yeah. So George, how do you do? How would you, if you had to assess his work, what would you say?
Look, in purely professional terms, that was Falcon great.
Yes. Thank you. Thank folk. All right. I'm calling it on these jokes. We've milked that bit.
Oh boy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, I've done my bit to give the listeners a little update on who Peter, Paul, and Mary are. Now you begin to make your case for why this particular album is perfect, George. But before we get into that album, we want to know about you a little bit. We would love to know what your relationship has been with music throughout your life, writ large, if you will.
Okay, so I tried to come up with a word because that grounds me. Intentional. My relationship to music is intentional. It's something I think I strive to be. It helps, calm the chaos of the world. But I have a really, because so much of my relationship to music is professional, I need to be intentional about how I use it, right? So there's a broad range of music that I engage with in two different ways, specifically professionally. But then there's the personal aspect. I grew up with music. I grew up around music, specifically Irish folk music, which is really relevant to this conversation. So I knew I came to Peter, Paul, and Mary late, but Irish folk music is something that it was on the record player in the house, but more importantly, it was a family event. We would go to these I grew up in Pittsburgh, and we would go to these little bars in Pittsburgh, in the side of a mountain, as they are, and see these bands from Ireland. Some of them were, had names, and some of them were just these bands that had come over. And so that really was foundational for me. That music is very theatrical, or that way of engaging the audience to me is very theatrical. A lot of folk music, and particularly Irish folk music. There's always the sing along. There's always the comedy bits. There's always that engagement. But it's also my heritage. So there was something as a very young boy that just made sense, right? So music, writ large, if you will, is, as I've compartmentalized and as you learn to grow and as an actor stand in front of people and keep yourself together, as a teacher stand in front of people, and now as an administrator stand in front of people and keep yourself together. Part of the way I do that is by creating a boundary emotionally, right? Music to me is a conductor. It conducts emotion. It takes me. It is always a way that I can tap into emotionality, either in my life or for work when I need to. Yeah, and I've spent a lot of my career singing. and all kinds of music. And at the theater school, I teach a class that historically is jazz music, which also was something that my dad played in the house. So that is a real tool that I use to help teach actors jazz music, live and recorded, mostly recorded, especially now because budget. Anyway, so I would say my relationship to music is intentional. The thing I also use music for, if I'm being intentional, is time traveling. Like music to me is a time traveling tool. It takes me, Irish folk music takes me back to my family as a young boy, takes me back to, sometimes it would just be me and my dad. And this was when I was way under drinking age, right? Mm-hmm. And we would just be in these bars and get a burger or whatever Irish thing they were serving and listen to this music. And then there was all kinds of music in the house, jazz and musical theater and all of that. So my relationship to music is intentional. I use it, but also it's my way of staying grounded, staying in touch with my emotions, the truth. There's no lie. One of the things that Peter, Paul, and Mary say is that, language, you can be deceitful with language. You can lie. You can do this. A singing voice does not lie. Music does not. It is truthful. And I believe that was Peter Yarrow, but that to me is true. Sometimes rather than going to therapy, I will go and take a really good voice lesson. And that is as therapeutic to me.
Yeah.
Because the music and the voice is connected to, I think, who we are on this really primal level.
Preach. Did your dad pick up a fiddle? Was he a fiddler? Was he participating at all, or was he just sitting there with you, chilling, listening?
Oh, he was participating in the event in the sense that he would talk back and sing, and because that was the tradition. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, Tyler, my family is not musical.
Really? They just love it. They just love it. Yeah.
I mean, I think my dad was in a glee club in, they were in the 50s kind of a thing in college or whatever. But he could kind of carry a tune. My mother could carry a tune, had done some things. Neither of my sisters cannot. But they were not musical in that way. I mean, my dad, played an instrument or whatever, but so there's also this anomaly of like being around it as a young person so much and it becoming my thing or my way through the world. I don't know.
No, I get that. I get that big time. I would say that my family is actually kind of similar in some ways. We are great lovers of music, but we just do podcasts about it.
Have you been to Ireland?
Yes.
Okay, so you realize that like the sort of experience that you were having in Pittsburgh is identical to what's happening in Ireland, and that they literally will just break out in song in pubs often.
What is so truly beautiful about that is, so we'd been planning it. We'd been planning a sibling trip. When my mother died my dad died in late 80s. Actually, been gone a long time. My mom died in 20, I can't remember years, 15, 16, something like that. And my sisters, I have two, who are 10 years older than I am, who also had a great influence on my musical taste because they were 10 years older than me, right? I was born in 1968. And they were listening to things when I was a real child that, right, which connected me in a way. And
invaluable.
Right? Like it absolutely invaluable. And they're friends and that's where I fell in love with Bruce Springsteen. That's where I fell in love with so many of these, people that have been talked about on this. I've listened to your podcasts.
It shows, George.
So my sisters and wait, what was I talking about? I don't even remember. No, I don't
Ireland.
Oh, Ireland, right. So when my mom died, my sisters and I were like, we're going to Ireland. Of course, it took a minute, and then we didn't go until 2019, y'all. Ooh. Which means if we hadn't gone, we might have never gone. Yeah. It was a really powerful moment, and we wandered into bars and like saw people that are people in Ireland that, singing and just sitting around and being Irish and making music, and just welcoming us. And honestly, it felt like that on a musical level and on a George Keating level felt like I just felt like I belonged.
Yeah.
From the minute I stepped off the plane.
That's amazing.
So from Irish folk music to Peter, Paul, and Mary, how did you discover them? I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about how you discovered this particular album, because I know you and I talked about the artist when you were trying to figure out who to talk about. You were focusing more on the artist because, I mean, they kind of existed at a time when people put out like 87 albums. Yeah. So maybe it's better to talk about like how you discovered them, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting how I discovered this album, but
go for it.
Well, they were around. I'm not going to say they were because Irish folk music was so prominent in my home. They were not necessarily prominent. I knew who they were, Peter, Paul, and Mary. Mm-hmm. I really discovered them in the 80s. Which is when they were coming back. Right. I knew who they were, but to me, they were a kind of, I don't know, I didn't understand them. And they were kind of a cliche. They could have been a cliche, right?
Yeah.
And I came to them, really, I fell in love with them on the album I almost proposed from them too, which is their A Holiday Celebration is the record. But it's not on Spotify. There are only 2 tunes on Spotify, but you can rent the live concert. There is on that record is for me the epitome of Blowin' in the Wind is on that record. Is that recording is so soulful and powerful. And what I was drawn to at that time with my love of music in the 80s, folk music in the 80s, was the way they transformed a meaning song, so like a labor song or a what have you, or an activist song, in a way that became, talking about getting in touch emotionally, I am emotionally moved by the blend of their voices.
Yeah.
The way in which they bring a song to life, the way in which they arrange a tune, that many of their tunes, let's face it, are kind of nursery rhymes in the sense that they just repeat over and over again. You come back to the chorus and it's a pretty simple, right? That is part of the idea of folk music, which is that it is accessible to people to sit in a bar and sing. So these are simple melodies in some ways. And I don't use the word simple as any kind of disparagement, but they are melodies to be sung, and the way their voices bring it to life is almost subversive because they're getting this message across. But people are like, oh, aren't they sweet? Isn't this sweet and lovely? And aren't I feeling all gooey inside?
Right.
Get out and do something. That's what I'm saying.
Get up.
Get up. Do something. Sing from below your belly button.
Yeah.
I mean, Mary Travers, man, like that.
Oh, she's something.
Just and where that comes from is it, there are certain voices that sound like they're just going to shatter at any moment. And that's hers to me, in a really exciting way. It is just so alive and so vibrant that you're like, how is that even coming out at certain moments, especially in her younger days. On some of these recordings. So that's how I felt. I started to fall in love with them there. And this album really came to me because, Michael, you and I were talking at Cherubs about what I should do. Thank you. About what I should do. And I was really drawn, even at that time before recent national events, to folk music and activism. It just felt like that's what I needed to do. I felt like I needed to go back in selecting an artist to something of my awakenings of my younger days, right? So I knew that to propose Peter, Paul, and Mary, it had to have Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, which is a Dylan song that they made. I believe, if I'm right, Dylan and they recorded it at the same time. And their recording is what made it was before Bob Dylan was on the map the way he became on the map.
Right. Because they predated him just a bit in terms of like popping off, as the kids say.
Yep. But here's where I came to this album. I started listening to all the Don't Think Twice It's All Right. Mm-hmm. I will say that the Don't Think Twice It's All Right that's on Live in Japan is not my favorite. I mean, it's not to me the sort of epitome of it. But what it brought me to was the fact that if I was going to propose Peter, Paul, and Mary, it had to be a live album because they spent their time in front of people. Yeah. They spent, that first decade of their success. I mean, what a mantle to carry when they were at that age, to be these voices of, in all of this activist way, the March on Washington and Selma and the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968. I mean, all of these things where they were present and they were doing their thing, that became that had to weigh on them in terms of what they were to symbolize, right?
If just in case you missed that, just because I didn't make mention of that in the 60-second intro, which is why 60 seconds is an absurd amount of time to try to do this. That's why we keep doing it. But let's say it again. They were at the March on Washington. They were there. They were like, these are activist credentials. These are, as I think it's important what you say about them maybe getting this cliche sort of. There's this assumption of a bit of cliche about them now, looking back, but they were really in it, and I think that was something that I didn't fully appreciate before diving into this task. So we can't overstate that.
Tyler, as an old person, I will say to you, okay, I was born in 1968. I'll just say that. I'm not going to be coy like my friend Martine was. I love you, Martine. They weren't just doing, they continued to be that their entire careers and their entire lives. And Peter Yarrow and Noel Stuckey are still alive, I believe. Mm-hmm. I'm almost done, I'm sure.
I think so. Mary passed away, but Peter and Paul are still there.
Mm-hmm. They continued to be those people. They continued to ask those questions. They continued to do, they recorded a song, the Jesus is on the Wire, the Matthew Shepard Matthew Shepard song. They continued to stay. They have this labor melody that I just love, that are labor songs, and these songs that you can sing along to. So then I found this Live in Japan thing, right? And what was interesting to me is that I am no expert in terms of Japanese theater. I'm not, but I did study with a Japanese sensei on kabuki. I studied with him in the States. His name is Shozo Sato, and I learned kabuki from him, and then have subsequently, with his blessing, have taught kabuki. So there was something really interesting to me when I was looking through this record through that lens. Mm-hmm. And the perfection of this record is whether they knew it or not. And I think they did know it on this human level. They approached their set list, which is two different concerts. I mean, I'll be real, but they approached their set list with this sense of Johaku, which is Japanese. It's about rhythm. It's about Johaku means like intro, break. I forget what the last part is, but it's basically about how you begin and welcome an audience in, and then you change it, and then you bring it home. Yeah,
they do that.
They do it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The way this record starts is so welcome, is so come on in. We're just going to be real quiet. We're just going to be real slow. We're going to build this. We're going to start this one voice at a time. Right. And then we're going to just nail you with If I Had My Way, which is like, for me, the break where they're just like, okay, you know what? We're sexy too. And we're going to get like down and dirty.
That's the one for me. If I Had My Way, I think I felt welcomed in, but by the time I got to If I Had My Way, I was like, oh wow, this was not what I expected it to. This had some undercurrent that I didn't expect it to have.
I want to hear. Tell me about that. I mean, am I allowed to ask you questions?
Hey,
yeah, go for it.
My podcasts, man. No, you can ask me questions. Yeah. What do you want to know?
I want to know what you mean. Like that's where, like, what was the?
It was just to clinch it because it's after Paul Talk, which if you're going to go and listen to this album, then that's a crazy experience of listening to this sort of comedy routine that is just plopped right in the middle of it. But very much that you could see at this kind of concert if you've listened to folk recordings from that era. And then there's obviously the seminal Puff the Magic Dragon that comes before that. And so you're sort of getting this picture of who they are through those early tracks. But then for me, if I had my way, I think it's something where it's like tight. There's a tightness to the harmonies. Obviously, that expression "tight" comes up a lot when you read about Peter, Paul, and Mary. But there's something so efficient about that song. There's a control element to it. It's just craft, right? It's so well crafted. Like we're so prepared. And I think it kind of blew me away. I wasn't expecting it, and that is a perfect thing to keep you going into the second half of this very long album.
This is what I love about their harmonies. They when they come back to something, they are listening always, and they are always, and even at that point in their career, which was 6 years after they became a big deal. Mm-hmm. They were responding to each other, and that to me is sexy.
Hell yeah.
It just changes. I think that song, Tyler, I'm so glad that you agree. I think that song changes the expectation and goes, we're going to get dangerous now. Do you understand?
Yeah.
We're going to get dangerous. We're going to scare you a little bit with some of these sounds that we're going to make and with some of this messaging. That song is violent. It is a violent song. Mm-hmm. They are not promoting violence.
No.
But they are using it as this image of like, I'm going to tear it down. It's the Samson Delilah thing. It's the, and then if we get into the whole activism thing, like I think that's the tune that's credited to a reverend.
If I Had My Way.
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Reverend Gary Davis. And here's what happened. They came upon his arrangement of it's I don't know. I think there's part biblical verse. I think there's whatever. It's like a folk song that's traditionally passed down and was sung in churches. And this reverend started this arrangement, and they riffed on that arrangement. And what did they do? Which they did so many times throughout their career. The rights. Reverend Gary Davis owns the rights to their arrangement, y'all.
Really?
I
didn't know that.
They did that a couple of times. I mean, this is activism. They're like, oh no, this isn't ours. This is theirs.
Yeah. Doesn't belong to us. That's cool.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so we're talking about we're digging into the minutiae of songs already. So this is a good time for us to put you on the spot because, full disclosure, everyone, George didn't decide a standout track for us ahead of time. He had many choices, but now is your chance, George. Would you tell us, in this moment, what to you is the standout track from this album?
Okay, I gotta go. This whole "If I Had My Way." I mean, I want people. You gotta go listen to it, people.
Yeah.
You gotta go listen to it.
Okay.
But
cool. So hold on. You're not choosing that as the standout track, or you?
Did I just?
No. You're good. Go. Keep going.
I'm not. I'm gonna go. Hurry Sundown.
Oh, okay.
And because we went, and here's why. The transition for me is this talk about like this openness, this underlying current of grit and dirt and whatever, and that to me is, this Hurry Sundown it's not a labor song, but it is clearly the character in this song are people who work in the field, people, right?
Okay, well, hold that thought right there. Let's let them listen to it, shall we? All right, everybody. Yeah. So if we're gonna give you a little taste of Hurry Sundown